大家好，我是外文系大二张雨晨。Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to give a brief introduction of Dead Man's Stone and also provide my personal viewpoint of the poem's analyst. At first, I will give the introduction of the structure of the poem, and then I will read the text for you and give my analysis. So in the overview of the poem, its structure comprises 13 uneven length stanzas with lines also of uneven length. There is no rhyme scheme and no regular metrical rhythm. The sentences are free-flowing, many with end-stop lines, which create a choppy or centrally rhythm, and the effect is disturbing, appropriately for a poem which describes such brutality. And after introduce the structure of the poem, I'm going to read the text for you. The plodding limbers over the shattered cheek, racked with their rusty freight, stuck out like many crowns of thorns, and the rusty stakes like centuries old, to stay the flood of brutish men upon our bloodless deer. The speaker, a third-person narrator who are in the poem begins abruptly without introduction, reflecting the reality of life in the trenches, where there was no time for the luxury of meditation or sentimentality. And the words limbers is a two-wheeled wagons used to pull guns, have to move or plunge, and they do so without paying attention to anything in their way. And the word shattered check tells the reader that there has been fighting in the area. We can assume that these are weapons being moved across the battlefield. In this context, freight means goods transported in bulk, suggesting heavy fighting has taken place. In very few words, Rosenberg builds a scene that the reader may assume is tense and dangerous. And the British men are the enemy, the German troops. There is a note of anger in this description. However, in the next stanza, the reference to friend and foeman shows the humanity of the speaker. The wheels lurch over sprawled dead, but pain them not, through their bones crunch. Their shut mouth makes no moan. They lie there huddled, friend and foreman, men born of man and born of woman, and shows go crying over them, from night till night and now. Following the opening stanza, the Gothic style horrors begin. And the semantic field of words emphasize the awfulness of what will follow, lurch, sprawled, painted, and crouch and mourn. And in the next line of British of the friend and foeman. In the first stanza, they refer to the enemy as British men who have destroyed our brothers dear, but now, however, they are friend and foeman, and they have become reconciled in their shade fate, only humans with mutual needs and emotions that drive them to huddle together. And look to the light and shells go crying over them from night till the night and now. These two stanzas are vivid and concise in the depiction of horror of strange warfare. And then, earth has waited for them, all the time of their growth, freighted for their decay. Now she has them at last, in the strength of their strength, suspended, stopped, and held. In the second stanza, Rosenberg's idea is that the young men are predestined to die and that a personified earth, that is their graves, await them impatiently and did so even while they were growing boys. And the repetition of strength reinforced the idea of their youth cut short. and illustrate that the future is dangerous for these young men. What fears imagines their dark soul lit earth have they gone into you? Somewhere they must have gone, and flown on your hard back. Is their soul sack? Is their soul sack emptied of God, essential essence? Who hurled them out? Who hurled? The speaker seems to be asking a question of earth, having taken their bodies, where have the souls of these young men gone? It is notable that these souls are dark, and yet at the same time they lead a fierce images. And their terrible destiny is reinforced by the sickening idea of their souls being brutally flown on your hard back. None saw their spirits shadow shake the grace, or stood aside for the half-used life to pace. All of those doomed nostrils and doomed mouth, when the swift iron burning bee drank the wild mahogany of their youth. The idea in these three lines is that their deaths were heartbreakingly ignored. Isaac is trying to capture human attention in this depiction. And it depicts the word, and it uses the word half-used life, escaping from doomed nostril and doomed mouth. Note the repetition is made more tragic in that no one even stood aside. And create the image of a soul seeping away unnoticed is vivid and chilling. Also, the imaginative metaphor is characteristic of the author Rosenberg. The burning bee is clearly a bullet draining the life. And this idea emphasizes the loss of the young soul. What fears imagine? What of us who flaunt on the shaking prayer, walk our usual thought untouched? None saw their spirit shadow shake the grace, or stood aside for the half-used life to pace. All of those doomed nostrils. Sorry, I mistake the stanzas. And I will read the text again. What of us who flaunt on the shaking prayer, work our usual thoughts untouched, our lucky limbs as on ichor fed, immortal seeming ever. Perhaps when the flames beat loud on us, a fear may choke in our veins, and the startled blood may stop. In this stanza, the speaker asks a further unanswerable question. The vivid, expressive, shaking prayer is a metaphor to convey the idea of war. The prayer is not only personal fight, but also utter shrieks that convey agony and terror. The poet is referring to those who experience the conflict but escape death, or our usual thoughts untouched. And he suggests that the fortunate ones who escape are like ancient Greek gods who have a special form of blood, ichor in their veins, and possess immortality. And later, the rhetorical question is answered by the poet immediately, an example of hyperbola. So the reader no doubt predicts this, the inevitability of the death of all soldiers, including those who have been spared for the time being. The air is loud with death, the dark air spurts with fire, the explosion ceaseless are, timelessly now, some minutes pass, those that stroll time with vigorous life. Till the chaparral cold and end, but not to all. In bleeding pangs, some born on stretchers dream of home, their things, wool-blotted from their hearts. The three sentences start with the like a refrain. There are syntactic parallels, creating a rhythmic effect that emphasizes the horror. And the blend of these different sensory image is known as load with death, spurts with fire, explosion ceaseless. To highly be visual and violent, and convey the idea that death is usually silence, but here it is loud. Air doesn't normally spurt, but here it does, mixed with another element, fire, and to cause the effect, a confused, terrifying combination in which the men are overwhelmed by the battle. The chaparral, the cause of death of many young men, is personified simply in random control of who live and who will die. And after the brutal description, the speaker reverts to tenderness. The men are dear things. The concise compound verb warm-blooded to describe their grieving hearts ends the stanza gently and emotionally. Maniac earth, hurling and flying, your bow, seared by the jack fire, the iron love, the impetuous storm of savage love, dark earth, dark heavens, swinging in chimic smoke. What deaths are born when you kiss each soundless soul, with lightning and thunder from your might heart, which man's self-dog and his blind fingers loose. The stanza can be considered as a whole. After the tenderness of the previous few lines, the speaker seems overcome with anger and horror, addressing and blaming the capitalized earth for the catastrophe of war. A man's brains splattered on a stretcher's bearer's face. His shook shoulders slipped their load, but when they bent to look again, the drowning soul was sunk too deep for human tenderness. They left this death with the altered head stretched at the crossroads. And the stanza splits neatly into two. Instead of a reign, it is a brief narrative story of one man's death. The brains splattered on a stretcher bearer's face is gothic in its horror. And the verb splattered forms an eerily dramatic climax. Line 3, with the iterative S and SHS and long vowels, suggests the slow process of the body sleeping of the strangers. This contrasts with the human tenderness of the second half of the stanza, when the stretcher bearers try to offer comfort, but the injured man is too far gone. The drowning soul is a metaphor for death or unconsciousness. And the sentence, they left this dead with the older dead straight at the crossroads. It is a point where the dive ends in the poem. Burned black by strange decay, their sinister face lie, the lid over each eye, the grace and colored clay, where motion have lay, joined to the gray sunk silences. The Gothic depictions continue with the burnt black decay faces as if they have literally been burning in hell. And the iterative plus B is suggests disgust. The adjective singsters reinforce this. And in the last three lines express deep sadness. Line 5 reverses the normal syntax so that the idea of more motion is put first to emphasize its importance. Here is one not long dead. His dark hearing calls are far wills, and the chalk saw strange weak hands to reach the living world. The far will said, the bloodless intelligence beating for light, crying through the suspense of the far torturing wills, sweet for the end to break, or the wills to break. Cried as the tide of the world broke over his sight. The speaker continues with another short narrative story, imagining the last moments of one not long dead. The darkness that dominates stanza 8 is reprised in the description that hearing. Like the personified earth, the fire wheels also speak, but the living word that they utter escapes the dying man. The alternatives are that either he will die or the wheels will break, but the outcome is obvious. The light in line 5 represent hopes. The tides of the world are not the wagon, but the events that lead to war and that to the crisis of one insignificant and yet insignificant. Will they come over, even as the mixed hoofs of the moors, the quivering bellied moors, and the rushing wheels are mixed, all mixed with his tortured upturned side. So we crash around the bank, we heard his weak scream, we hear his very last sound, and our wheels graze his dead face. The man's desperation is portrayed in the repeated question, so that the readers feel his emotion. Having written most of the poem as an observer, in the first line the poem changed the point of view to that of the injured man, asking a question. But his upturned side, that is, his hope of rescue, is destroyed by the moors and a wagon, a confusion of detail. And the word weak scream and Gray's face make the readers know that the poem will end soon and tragically. And the last, the word crash predict the disasters to come. The repetition we crash, we heard, and again we heard brings the poem to a tense dramatic climax. Finally, the story revolves simply with the tragic last slow line. And my presentation is finished. Thank you.